All right, welcome everyone. Hello. I'm Ron Potvin. I'm the Assistant Director of the John Nicholas Brown Center, and I know you all know that, but I'm modeling good behavior. That is what I would like you all to do when you step up to the podium, is introduce yourself and say where you spent your summer. I'm looking forward to hearing all about your summer adventures. Well, maybe not all about them, because you only have 5 things in 5 minutes. But I was reading the blog throughout the summer, and it seems like you had some great adventures. It was a really good year for the blog, too. I don't know what Steve and Susan think, but I usually have to prod folks a bit during the summer, and it seems like this group is really self-prodding, which is really great. So your summer practicum is a chance to explore different places, different organizations, different ideas, and hopefully these experiences will help you to plan the rest of your time here at Brown, choose your classes, and choose your second practicum. And I'm meeting with a small group of you after this about your second practicums. So I'm looking forward to that too. So each of you today will share 5 things you learned in 5 minutes. Which is grammatically awkward because I know it took you more than 5 minutes to learn them, but you have 5 minutes to discuss 5 things. I'll keep a clock, and when you get to 4 minutes, I'll stand up, just a subtle reminder. If you hit 5 minutes, I have a boat horn. Actually, no, Steve has the boat horn in keeping with his class, but it's a 19th century boat horn, so it's not that loud. We are recording the sessions today. And they'll be made available, where's Sabina? Online, is that right?
Online on our website.
Okay, so if you have any questions about that, ask Sabina. Wally is our sound and video person, and he'd like to show you how to use the microphone.
So real simple, there's a little clip here, just clip it onto your shirt, and you're ready to go. And you can leave the wireless receiver here. Thank you.
So the order of presentations is on the whiteboard, and the way I do it every year is to put all your names on a piece of paper, fold them up, and put them in a baseball cap, shake them up, and pull them out. So this is the order that came out of the hat, with the exception of a couple who were going to be late, so I put them down at the bottom. So don't blame me, blame the hat if you don't like your order. So when it's your turn, come up, tell us your name and where you spent your practicum, starting with Chandra.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Chandra Dickey. I'm a second year in the Public Humanities program. I'm also a fellow at the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. And this summer, I went back home to Atlanta and spent the summer at the Georgia Humanities Council. So I did like a lot of communications work and copywriting, and I also helped kind of restructure their grants program and did a lot of data analysis. So my 2 supervisors were the president, Kelly, and Laura, the vice president, who was basically like communications director. So the first thing I learned is that sometimes networking is just making friends. My supervisors were really great and very proactive, which I feel very lucky about. They let me sit in on a lot of board meetings and a lot of meetings with like presidents of different universities that the Humanities Council was collaborating with. And they really made a great effort to introduce me to people and remind me to follow up with them, whether it be like taking a half day and going to visit people at the Woodruff Arts Museum, which houses the High Museum of Art, to have lunch, or shadow people around, which was really helpful. So for me, this is more about like seeing Laura and Kelly's longevity in the arts and cultural scene in Georgia. So the people they would allow me to have meetings with and talk with, often their relationships weren't defined to their professional lives. Sometimes like things in their personal lives spilled over. So like just seeing like how Laura and Kelly would mention like, oh, I know your kids need help with X, Y, and Z, like maybe I can write a letter of recommendation or something like that. So just thinking about how people's connections can like help you in other ways outside of your professional life. And then I met the director of the Oakland Cemetery, which is the photo I have right here. He was super nice and like picked me up in a golf cart and gave me a tour of the cemetery for fun. And now we're friends. The second one, opposites attract, or I'm at my desk all day and I like it. Before coming to Brown, I was a K through 12 ESL instructor, so I spent a lot of time running around after kids, playing soccer, being in a very dirty, sweaty classroom with like 50 plus students. So to have my own office space and to just like be able to sit at a desk and determine what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, not have things be mandated by the state, was super different, and I realized I actually liked it. So I put the screenshot up here from the New Georgia Encyclopedia, which I helped update and did like some archival research for, just as like a proof that I did something even though I was at a desk all day. Okay, third thing, revise and let it go. So working under the Vice President of Communications, I did lots of copywriting and copy editing for our website, and I often sometimes did some stuff for our annual report, like writing up, I guess, different memos, or like pulling different stories from our grants and trying to figure out like how can we get to the heart of what we're trying to do here and convey that to outsiders. So she would take one of my like drafts I wrote up and just like rip it apart. But she was also very supportive and just constantly reminded me that you can keep editing, but at some point there's going to be a deadline. At some point you're just going to have to let it go and hope that you did a good enough job within the time constraints that you had to get your message across. So that was really helpful. Fourth thing, time is a circle. So if you look, I'm just going to let everyone look at that. On my first day at the Georgia Humanities Council, I came across this little pamphlet, and it was for a conference, Technology in the African American Experience. And you can see that, who's that? That's Susan, and that's Steve. Isn't that funny? Wait, they yelled at you? I'm so sorry. Well, I brought it up for a reason. So yeah, time is a circle, and it's also like literally before I was born. Like that's wild. What? Yeah. So I literally saw this the first day of my internship, and since then, because I went back home, I constantly came back in touch with either professors I had known or people I had grown up with who were involved in Atlanta's arts and cultural scene in ways that I didn't know before. So I'm constantly thinking about, okay, I'm making all these connections. How can I make sure to maintain them for the future? Yeah. Last thing, sometimes you have to leave before it gets done. So I did a lot of work. I didn't see a lot of the work come to fruition. We just opened our grant cycle last month, and I basically restructured the whole thing. So it was nice to see some of my implementations get added, but at the end of the day, sometimes you do work on really big projects, but you have to go before everything gets finished. So those are the 5 things I learned.
Okay, I am Connor Mcdonald. I'm a second year in the MA program at the Public Humanities, and I did my summer practicum at New London Architecture, which is actually not in Connecticut. It's in Old London, so it's a little deceptive. No one in London really got that joke, unfortunately. So I spent 2 months working with them in the UK, and then 2 scheduled weeks here in communication with them. My project was helping them kind of do a survey of the role of cultural institutions, primarily museums, in urban development. And they're really looking at that, building a new city. They have a charter that they want the city to strive for. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about other things that I learned. I think kind of on 2 levels, like the levels of the practice or organizational perspective, but also my personal career. So I have some of each. They really had a very broad constituency, and I really learned that while it takes a lot of work, similar to Chandra's point, like sometimes you just have to stay in touch with people because you have shared interests, and you sort of are friends. And then this was a picture I took outside of a conference that was held on the second week I was there. It was held in London City Hall, which was a spectacular, famous building, and we had the run of the whole place except for the offices. People came from Tokyo, from Sydney, from Toronto, from New York, and from around London for this. And it just, that day just really hammered home for me. Like, if you want to do big things, you really have to keep a big network, even though it may seem costly and expensive to keep that. This is sort of an example of the types of people they stay in touch with and sort of keep relationships going with, even though they're not focusing on each one of these throughout the year. In addition to conferences, they do exhibitions and smaller events and talks and walking tours and the whole 9 yards. On a personal sort of career level, I was really interested in seeing what it was like to work in sort of in a consultant type of a role. And so I worked with my supervisor to let this 2-month period be that. I have spent 10 years in the back office, like in a structured environment where I had my own desk and I was there, and you could put meetings on people's calendars without their permission, like that level of intimacy. And this project was a good experience for me. They have an existing structure where they have core staff of less than 10, and then they have a rotating group of consultants and part-time people and just this network of people that contribute. So they had a structure where they were used to that type of work. I actually met someone from Cranston, Rhode Island, who is in that capacity. And it was a perfect moment because I had a supervisor who could kind of give me internal feedback, because my perspective on consultants is they don't know what you really think inside until they don't get hired again. So this was a good moment for me to leverage. I learned that structure is critical. Kind of a free-flowing person, but I put the schedule that I was working with up there because working at the building center, I couldn't get anything done because there were always people to talk to, and I can't control myself. But then, like, the weird situation in London is, like, the cafe is closed at 4, the research library is closed at 4:45, but they didn't open until 10. It was hard to get, like, a solid, even an 8-hour block to just sit and work anywhere. So just being aware of, like, where are you going to work was a big thing to learn. And then people's schedules, like, I always tried to put a meeting on someone's calendar 2 weeks in advance and add in some extras that I could lose if it fell through, just to make that contact and make it easy and comfortable for people. So those are just sort of like career type things. No one in London is ever going to return an email for you that you send it to in the afternoon. So just in case you're curious, it's not going to happen. You got to email them at between 8 and 9 and you'll get a response, but otherwise just forget about it. The other thing I learned is I'm never the type of person to just put myself out there and just ask for what I want. And this summer, I think I really learned to just let people decide whether they were going to help me or not. The worst thing that would happen is they said, that's really interesting, but I can't do it right now. Mostly they would find a different way to help. It was just a personal growth thing. I was like, I just always sit and wait, and I just asked, let them decide. Here's an example where I learned that you actually do sometimes need to use Twitter. I know nobody really likes to do that, and maybe millennials will suffocate Twitter and it'll be over and we won't have to deal with it. But I emailed this woman all the time, and she was I was trying to reach Justine Simmons, who's the director of culture for the City of London. And I emailed her a bunch, I just never got anywhere. I had people kind of like email her from other angles. But I was interacting with her on Twitter. I was retweeting, I was commenting on her tweets. She was like liking my responses, and then she had someone else find me on Twitter who gave me someone's email to reach out to. I mean, it didn't result in what I wanted, but I was just surprised that it actually worked. So you can Twitter stalk people, no problem. And then from an organizational perspective and from a personal perspective, I was grilling my supervisor on how he does program evaluation. How do you know he's been so successful? How does he know each program is building towards the goal? And he was like, you can run all the metrics you want, it's not a bad idea, but really you've got to get out from your desk and go talk to your constituents and see, and they will tell you and they will let you know. So from an organizational perspective, in terms of building towards something, and then on a personal level, just connecting with people in person, got so much more traction. And that's what I learned. And this is just sort of like an amazing dinosaurs outer space escalator mashup at the Natural History Museum that I just needed to share. So.
So how's everyone doing? Yeah.
Good, how are you?
I'm a little bit, I'm glad that today has finally arrived. I've been extremely stressed about this day, but I'm glad that it has all come together, and I'm happy to be in this room with all of you, sharing what I learned this summer. And so these are the 5 things I learned in El Salvador. So I actually don't have photographs because of number 5. But let's start with number 1. So how to conduct fieldwork. So this was not just a practicum for me, this was also part of my dissertation research. And it was my first time going out into the field and conducting research, in particular ethnographic field work. And I got some funding to go to El Salvador, and it was like learning how to swim, because it was something that my advisor had suggested. I got some funding to go, and when I got there, I was like, what do I do? So how to conduct field work. 2, what is the role of an informant, which builds off of number 1. So while I was there, I had an amazing woman who knew everything about the city that I was in. She knew all of the people that were there, and she was my grounding figure in everything that came out of this project. And without her, I don't think the field work would have been as productive as it was. And so the reason I thought that was so important is because in sociology, people don't really think of informants as anything else but an informant. And for me, this was an attachment, like someone who I can continue talking to as I conduct more field work. And so, yeah. I also just realized I didn't introduce myself. My name is Edwin Rodriguez. I'm a second-year PhD student in American Studies. I'm also doing the MA in Public Humanities. So, yeah. So number 3, photography in theory versus in practice. So while I was there, I was taking photographs. And before that, I spent the whole spring semester thinking about how photography fits into my work. And what I realized is that photography is very different depending on where you are. And where I was, which was in El Salvador, photography had been used to demonstrate violence and war. And so I was dealing with all of that as I was taking my own photographs. And so photography in practice, it was hard taking photographs out there. I decided not to take a camera with me. I was using my iPhone. And the reason I decided on that was because I didn't want to carry around a Canon and have people looking at me and wondering what I was doing, and it just ruined the whole privacy of the whole thing. So outsider versus insider, and the skepticisms brought on by photography. I was an outsider and an insider at the same time. I'm a Salvadoran from Maryland. I was not born in El Salvador, and people know that about me just by looking at me. But yet when they hear me speak Spanish, they're like, what's going on? And so I really had to deal with what it meant to be a researcher, but also a Salvadoran, conducting this research. And that was really important for me in terms of the photographs that I took. As you guys will see, the photographs are of people, and are of people that I was participating in the same social activities that they were. So yeah. And 5, how to curate an exhibit. The exhibit is right there in the garage gallery. And I had never curated an exhibit before. I had worked in archives before this, and I had actually worked on a photography collection. And it was something that I always wanted to do, but also I'm not a photographer. This was my first time actually taking any sort of photography. And it was a really big learning process, but one that I would gladly do again, because I've always been thinking about how I can get my research into the public. And that's why I wanted to do the master's in public humanities. And so I really am glad that this exhibit is up. It's meaningful work for me, and I hope you all enjoy it. Next month, no, it's opening tonight at 5. It's in the garage gallery. You take a left, I think, and then you take a right, and I believe there's wine and cheese. I don't know.
Will you ever give a talk about these?
Yes. There will be a gallery talk on October 18th at 3. I believe that's family weekend. And yeah, so if you want to know more about what I did this summer, as opposed to just 5 things, I will give you 10 things. So yeah. Oh yeah. This is the poster. This is the poster that another American Studies PhD student, Alisa Malone, who's an alum of the Public Humanities program, she designed this collage. She used that one photograph that I had that's in the exhibit, and she just drew like different portions of every photograph, and she put them all together. And I was just like, yo, this is super cool. This is my poster. And yeah, so any other questions?
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Edwin.
Thank you.
Cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Parker Guerrero. I'm a second-year master's student in public humanities. And I was at Anacostia Community Museum this summer working on an upcoming exhibit about food culture and food justice in the DC area. So the first thing that I learned is that museums have histories, and that those histories kind of help us to understand why museums work the way they work. Shout out Professor Lubar. If you're not familiar with Anacostia Community Museum, it's part of the Smithsonian Institution. They do research and programming around African American history and culture in the DC area. But originally they were meant to be kind of an outpost for the Smithsonian in the southeastern portion of Washington, DC. If you see the map, the little red dot is where Anacostia Community Museum is. And it wasn't really, it was meant to be kind of a tool for the Smithsonian to bring more African American Washingtonians to the mall. But the founding director, John Kennard, who they hired, had other ideas for the museum. He didn't really come from the museum world. He was more of a community organizer. And so he drove the museum into more of a direction of community museums as we understand them today. And the current staff, my mentor, Samir Magali, who's the chief curator, really take that history and that legacy seriously and try to live that out in their work. I also learned that the first Ethiopian restaurant in the United States was in Washington, D.C. It was technically the second, but D.C. people like to claim it as being the first. So this is the chef, Desta Bairu. The restaurant was called Mama Desta. And we know a lot about the restaurant thanks to reviews like this. The DC kind of food writer corps was really fascinated by Mama Desta. She would kind of come out of the kitchen into the dining area and go from table to table greeting her customers. They were really fascinated with Ethiopian food, never having really been exposed to it. A lot of the writing kind of explains what this food is, how to eat it, what injera, which is the bread that you use, is. Really trying to just like make Ethiopian food kind of legible to non-Ethiopian eaters. We learned stuff about, how these restaurants were kind of central to the Ethiopian community in DC, what kind of non-Ethiopian people would go to these restaurants, lots of Peace Corps volunteers, all kinds of things. I also learned that DC had a lot of food co-ops from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I know a lot is kind of not a very specific scholarly term, but part of my research was to kind of learn about the historical factors that led up to food insecurity in certain parts of DC. So we see in the 60s, 70s, and 80s supermarkets just leaving DC as they were in cities around the country. Part of this had to do with them moving to the suburbs. Part of it had to do with supermarkets like Safeway moving from small stores to fewer larger stores to cater to kind of one-stop shopping experiences. And so what did people do? Part of the thing that they did was they started co-ops. So this one was a chain of co-ops named after Martin Luther King Jr. This article is from 1969. And so they had two co-ops, both in public housing complexes in the DC area. And this was just one example of the many co-ops that I found in my research. There was a women's trucking collective that was delivering food from foods outside of DC to co-ops. There were bakery collectives, lots of different types of co-ops. I learned that research is hard. It's kind of a grind. someone has usually beat you to it. Most people don't really understand what you're doing, but occasionally you'll find really interesting stories, and it can be really satisfying and rewarding when that happens. I also learned that I still like museums, despite spending a year of studying their flaws. I think they're still, I still enjoy them. So thank you.
Alice, when does the exhibit happen?
I think you should expect it fall of next year. They just reopened. Actually, the museum was closed up until, or they're reopening next week. It's currently closed for renovation, so yeah, I would say maybe this time next year. Yeah. Cool.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
So my name is Dash Wasserman. I'm a 6th year, I have to do the math now, new year, 6th year English PhD student, and I am doing the graduate certificate with the center. My summer was spent doing a practicum with Brown's Digital Publications Initiative, which is a collaboration between the University Library and the Office of the Dean of the Faculty. Kind of retooling my presentation just to focus on the 5 things here. Basically, what the initiative is tasked with is rethinking the scholarly monograph. What this means is that we're making books without pages. I worked with Allison Levy, who's the digital scholarship editor at Brown. This is a picture of us in action working on one of our projects. Usually, we are sitting. So this is about as active as it gets, as one of us standing up. But I decided, we work across a portfolio of 5 different projects, and I decided that I would focus on one skill that I learned from each of the 5 projects. So I'll sort of point and describe I'll describe one project each and then what I learned from it. So one project is by history professor Tara Numedal. It's this project that revolves around an early modern alchemy book, and being in English, I have 0 knowledge of this time period, so I'm learning a lot of material that's out of my field, but it's super fascinating, and this is the project that I first sort of cut my teeth on. And what I learned from this project, among many skills, was collaboration. Digital projects involve a lot of different hands. Beyond this being a project that is co-authored between Tara Numedal and an independent scholar, Donna Belak, who are the authors, there are various contributors. There are various writers contributing essays. There are also developers, there are designers. The person who I'm working with right there, her name is Crystal Bruche. She basically did all of the design work on this. So she's incredibly skilled, and I learned a lot from her. And in this picture, we're actually doing some coding work. So I learned how to do HTML. So each person brings a tremendous amount of knowledge, and reflecting on the various skills that people bring, I forgot that there are other people that I forgot to include in that list of collaborators, which includes the university press, because these are projects that are intended to be published by a scholarly press, the library administration, because the university librarian is the co-PI on this grant. It's a Malone-funded initiative. Various student workers who contribute to the project, from text encoding, copy editing, et cetera. Brown's legal team. I actually had to sign a release saying that I give Brown permission for all the work that I've contributed, from copy edits, so on and so forth. And then also the editorial team ourselves. So there are so many people who are contributing to these digital projects. So that was just very shocking, because the names on this are not just Tara Numedal and her author, but there's this huge acknowledgement section. So that was surprising. Second project is a history of virtual reality by Massimo Riva, and central to it are these incredible simulations that focus on different optical devices from the 18th and 19th centuries. From this project, I learned a lot about developmental editing. His project, unlike the first project, is in a platform. The previous project was custom built. It was a custom built site, so everything was done in HTML. This project, by contrast, was in a platform called Scalar, and he wanted to make use of a feature which allowed for multiple reading paths. He wanted to have a public-facing side to the project and a more scholastic side, so that a general reader could get one thing out of it, and an advanced reader could get something else. But the problem was that this project wasn't written that way, so we had to rewrite it so that it could have a further insight section. And so what this meant was that there was a lot of color coding, a lot of back and forth, a lot of handwritten changes, a lot of track changes and stuff like that. So I learned a lot about what it means to think about the user experience of these types of projects and to think about the reader experience too. So you think, being in English, that you know a lot about what it means to edit something, but thinking about the different formats really was surprising and enlightening. The third project was called Islamic Past and is called Islamic Past and Futures. It's by Shahzad Bashir in Middle East Studies, and it's this really interesting project about temporality in Islam through various artifacts in contemporary and ancient scenes in Islam. And from this project, I learned a lot about sustainability. The first two projects were pilot projects, and for this one, the library wanted to create a backend so that we could replicate these projects, and that would become cheaper. Just sort of moving, since I realized that time is running out. This project is by Sheila Bond in art history. Her project revolves around these really phenomenal architectural renderings of a monastery in northern France. And as you can imagine, these are very expensive assets. And so her project is exceeding the scope. And so I learned a lot about how to apply for a grant. This means this is a tremendously helpful skill no matter what field you're in. So finding grants that are a good fit for a project, it infuses resources into your project, which is great, it's useful, but it also helps ground you and to know what you're doing on a project, what the project mission is. So there's that, and just sort of moving along. The last project is Nicolas and the Roman Revolution. It revolves around two what do you call them, scrapbooks, one of which was, hi Ariana, thank you for joining us. It revolves around two scrapbooks, one of which was recently discovered, and what I learned from this project was about project development. We're still sort of figuring out what's in the second scrapbook, and so this is a project that's constantly evolving. And I think it's really good to know how to go with the flow on a project as opposed to sort of having something set in mind and then sort of sticking with it too closely. So these are very, very, very different projects. And it was hard to pick one skill for each, so I kind of listed a bunch of different ones, but it's been a really positive experience doing a bunch of different things across a bunch of different projects. So, in a nutshell.
Hi, I'm Sarah Moore. I am a PhD student in Assyriology and a certificate student in the Public Humanities Department. This summer, I did my summer practicum in the library right here at Brown. My project was digitizing cuneiform objects. This first started as using photogrammetry to make 3D models, but quickly evolved into a much larger project, which contributed to the 5 things that I learned that I'm going to tell you over the next 5 minutes. So, what did I learn? 1, archives and object biographies are endless. The more I worked with the objects, the more information I seemed to find. Our work is actively building on these archives and biographies. As I was delving into the past, I realized that my work on these records was further building those archives. There's a lot of uncertainty in digital work. It's hard to know how long your work will last, and also what final form it will end up taking. Hands-on experience with photogrammetry is crucial to being able to do that. I'm in a very privileged situation where I am at a wealthy university that has provided me with the equipment and training to do so, but it got me thinking about the other ways that I can help people who aren't as lucky learn how to do the same project. And last but not least, computers are stupid.
That's the last
I was
slide.
waiting all summer for dog pictures.
That's the last slide. Okay. And the person in that picture is Molly. Because I saw Molly in Denver. Okay. So, How do I do it in preview? Huh? I did it as a PDF, I'm sorry, yes.
Just make it full screen.
Oh gosh. View. And slideshow. Yeah, okay. All right, so hi, I'm Sophie. I'm a second year in the public humanities, like so many of us. Oh gosh. Okay, all right. Well, let's try it. Okay, so I spent my summer, I did 2 different practicum experiences. I spent the first half of the summer in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was at Site Santa Fe, which is a contemporary art space. And then the second half of the summer, I was at Fringe Arts in Philadelphia, which is more of a performing arts contemporary space, contemporary performing arts space. Okay, so 1, and thank you to the scavenger hunt team from last year for letting me use this picture. I didn't ask you, but thank you. First thing was, I really like working with people, and I already knew that, but I think this just re-established that that is something that I want to do professionally. Huh? Well, what?
I said it was a shock.
Oh, yeah, and what a surprise. But I love working with people. I like being public facing. I loved working with creative people and helping their visions, whether it was programs or projects or shows or whatever it was, help those come to fruition. And I really liked that because it was such a collaborative set of projects that I was working on. There were lots of deadlines and there was a lot of accountability, and it just didn't feel like anything was speculative at all. So I really enjoyed that. And so teamwork is nice. So yay for teamwork. And then the picture in the corner was at the Petroglyph National Monument. That was one that has, if you can see it, it has a lot of hands on it. And that was just a really beautiful monument. And I thought it had to do with teamwork because it's like hands. So that's why that's there. That was on purpose. All right. Kids say the darndest things. So I've worked in education before, so this isn't totally new. But when I was at Site Santa Fe, we did a little bit of teaching, myself and a couple other educators. We did some teaching about opera. And opera is a lot about tragedy. So we were talking about where to set scenes and kind of creating our own stories. And there were some different spaces that came up when students were deciding to set their stories in different places and cover different topics that were very sensitive topics. So thinking about like school shootings was something that came up. And I was talking with the other educators, and I would be curious, not right this second, but to hear what everybody's thoughts are, if you have thoughts, on how to address those kinds of topics without alienating students and trying to not immediately associate negative connotations with certain things that they're doing in their projects. Because if art is the way that they're expressing that, that's wonderful, but how do you do that within a classroom setting or camp setting, which was the way that we were doing it. Organizing festivals is tricky and layered. So at the Fringe Festival, or at Fringe Arts, they do a huge Fringe Festival every single year. And they're in their, I think it's the 17th year. They've been doing it for a very long time. And I've been involved in festivals before, but in a very light touch kind of way, where I'm just, tabling at an event at a festival. And this was a lot more work because it was myself and my 2 bosses, who are the 2 program directors for Fringe Arts, doing pretty much all of it, from the hospitality to the props to the for transportation to just like setting up internet for artists that were coming in from abroad, the kind of challenges that set up. And that you have to keep everybody happy, but you also want to be realistic, and that working as a nonprofit arts organization, the things that you can promise and actually deliver on, wanting to keep people happy, but also knowing what you can do. And that there are so many moving parts, which you can see. There are lots of moving parts, like when people are doing aerial arts. Immersive art is all the rage. So these were all places that I went this summer. And then there were also some more that I couldn't fit into this slide. So Meow Wolf is down here. This, I forget what it was. This one, I forget what it was called, but it was just an amazing installation that was in, I think it was in Tennessee. The big face was done by the Flaming Lips lead singer Wayne Coyne, who my mom ended up talking with for a little while, which was funny. Kusama exhibit. So just that is a really big thing that is happening right now, and I don't think it is super new to right now, but that across the country, it's just everybody's into immersive art, and I think it's great for accessibility, that like people want to do that, even if you don't want to go to a museum and see artwork. If you can walk into something, it's exciting, and that's a great way to experience it. But curious to see what will happen with it in the future. Leadership has a weird trajectory. So I talked to and I love that quote, but I talked to the founder who's still involved at Fringe Arts about his position currently within the organization. And there was a lot of difficulty, he was stating, about kind of letting go of different parts of the festival and allowing the organization to grow in the ways that it needs to, since it's 17 years old and contemporary art changes because it's of the time. So what does he let go of? How does he delegate? How does he give roles to people who can really speak to what's happening in the contemporary art movements of now while still being involved? So that was interesting. My Prius went off-roading. This is a bonus. I was pretty much living out of my car for 3 months, but so that can happen. And I pet a lot of dogs, and they were really cute. And that ice cream store, that's where Molly's parents own that ice cream store. So my last stop before heading back to Philadelphia was hanging out with Molly and trying lots of ice cream, and it was really nice. And look at these cute dogs. They're so sweet.
Questions for Sophie?
Yes?
Why did you have two?
Two what?
Practica.
I decided to do two, which like you can do, yes. I hope so, because I did it. My original plan was to just do Fringe, and then when I heard about what students had done in the past and what some of our cohort was doing, I wanted to go somewhere that was new, and I really wanted to go somewhere that had really cool rocks for camping and hiking and stuff. So I went to the Southwest and had connections at Site Santa Fe. So,
but that's why you went to Site Santa Fe. Why did you go to Philadelphia as well?
Oh, I'm from Philadelphia, and I have worked with Fringe in like other respects when I was working at the art museum, and I really like the programming that they put on, and it seems like they kind of had their heart in the right place. So it was nice to validate that.
Were there downsides to doing two?
I think being at site for longer would have been nice, because I wasn't able to really see any projects fully through. I wouldn't change how I did this summer, though.
I get it.
Yeah, it was really nice. But yeah, I think like Fringe, I was able to get a ton of things done. But then the Fringe Festival happened in September, so I only got to see a couple of the shows when I visited in September. Yeah, so there are downsides, but I liked being able to also compare those two spaces. Yeah.
What was the egg the person inside?
Oh, that egg. Well, that was me inside the egg. But that was this crazy, that was, I think that was in Virginia. And that was this crazy place called, it was like Dinosaur World 2. There isn't a 1. But Dinosaur World 2, and it was closed, but I drove out to Santa Fe with my mom, so it was like a fun road trip, and we were checking out lots of art things along the way. And the artist and owner of this like amusement park art world was there, so he just saw that we were there and gave us a tour. It was weird. There was also a Civil War portion to it, where the dinosaurs were eating. Yeah, it was a thing. That's a whole other topic. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just gonna throw that one in there.
So, hello everyone, I'm Iro, second year of Public Humanities. This summer, I went to Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside DC, to have my summer practicum. I went to Gallagher & Associates, which is an expansion designing company focusing on museum curation, designing, and education. So this is one of our projects of International Spy Museum at Washington, D.C. Can you find me? I just sit here. So to take this picture, this perfect picture, it took me more than 1 hour. And I need to sit at this one and just do the interactive more than 1 hour. So it's kind of disaster, but because you need to keep smile and just look at screen and wait. So the first thing that I learned from my summer practicum is know why you need to do this. So for me, the thing I was most afraid of was my supervisor was just giving me some busy work. When my supervisor asked me to build a database of all our clients, partners, and competitors, I saw some information was recorded even 10 or even 20 years ago. I was afraid that what I did was just killing time. So I asked my supervisor that the reason why we need this database. Finally, I got the idea that our firm was trying to broaden out its business and needed this information as the first step. Reminding myself the big picture is really important to prevent me from losing myself with too much daily routine and details. So the second thing is keep asking. Interning at a company to some extent means higher work pace. Every day there are a lot of online meetings, a lot of data information to collect, and a lot of clients and partners to contact. Everyone seems that he or her has his own schedule. The first week I came to GNA, sometimes I feel awkward that I didn't know which question is suitable to ask, or I would waste their time if I asked them some stupid questions. Finally, I realized that no question in the work is stupid or useless. To understand your task and your project as comprehensively as possible is also your duty. So do not hesitate to ask a question. Everyone in your group is willing to help you. So the third thing is nothing is useless. Every 2 weeks, GNA would hold lunch learning, which showcased the latest products and technology of our partners. My supervisors highly recommended me to attend this. At first, I could not understand because I did not think this is my field. The only reason I attend this one is just because of free lunch. Yeah, it's good. So when I attend this learning several times, I learned the trend of the best museum lighting system, the best furniture, and the best printing materials of labels. So just like here, it's a lot of picture that you take a look. So for me, this information might be very useful when doing my own projects. I remember one of the busy days in my department. We need to meet 2 deadlines in one day. Also, we need to keep contact with our clients and partners. Even as an intern who did not need to be responsible for that, I could feel the stressful atmosphere in our office. The high workload made our team some kind of impatience. At that time, my supervisor gave me 2 tips, and I thought they were really useful, and I want to share with you. So this one is, do not complain your work on your social media. The museum field is such a small community, even around the whole world. When you complain about your clients, your supervisors, or your projects, someone in the same field will see it. And this will influence your reputation in a negative way. So never do that on your social media. The last thing is, do not reply annoying email until next day. When seeing some annoying but not emergency emails, the best way is just to leave it, sleep, and reply it next day. Do not reply to them when you are tired or frustrated. Finally, you will regret it. So that's the 5 things that I learned from my summer practicum. Thank you. Okay. So.
Do you think you will work in a private company again?
I have to say it's kind of tired, but I think you can learn a lot because at that time you change an angle to see museum. Because at that time museums are my clients, you need to serve them. So like you will know like their requirements. Sometimes, just like some project will say, how about to do this? But the museum will say, no, we are clients, so listen to us. So it's a totally new experience for me. So any question? Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so 5 things I learned from my summer practicum. I'm going to talk really fast. So this summer I spent my time in a very big city in a very big state, Providence, Rhode Island. The first thing which I will talk about the project and where I worked from later on, connecting to some other points. So the first thing I learned, and thankfully no one has talked about it yet, is don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I'm talking about the application process, or when you're finding your practicum, especially for the first years in this room. So I applied to, in total, I think way more than 10 places, and these 10 are about places that have established internship programs already. So I've emailed also a lot of alums and connections from Ron and Steve. Shout out to Steve, thank you so much. Looking for practicums, or just saying, hey, do you have a desk and a project that you'd like free help from a grad student? I'm an international student from Taiwan, and at this time it's really hard to be international. So most of the programs, like I think almost all of the Smithsonian programs, they mostly wanted US citizens, so I technically don't fit in that category, but I still applied to those anyway, and I actually got very close with, I think, the Smithsonian Museum of American Art. I was one of the finalists, but I didn't get it anyway. But it was like a very informative process to know that it's kind of the process that I think of myself, what are the skills that I have and what I want to do for the summer. So that's pretty much it. Okay, this point, things will change, be prepared, is about the project. So I am the project assistant for the Rhode Island State House Restoration Society. And originally they planned to have a architecture competition that will lead to a architecture exhibition in 2020, which is the 125th year anniversary of the groundbreaking of the State House. My supervisor, Professor Marissa Brown here, they applied to several grants, but in the end, we didn't get most of the grants. So it was like oh my God, what could we do moment for all three of us. So, and this happened almost towards the end of my practicum, so I only have about a couple of weeks left. So I really had to think about, okay, what could I do in the remaining time I was with them. So they offered me to just join the docent team at the State House, which was really tempting because I've been a docent at National Museum previously and I really love my job. So it was a really tempting offer, but I really wanted to start something new for this project and also think about what I could contribute in the very limited amount of time. So I started a video project. Basically, I went out into Smith Hill. And shout out to Emma Bose, who's a recent graduate of the program. She did a project in Smith Hill, and she gave me all the contacts that she had in Smith Hill from a previous project. And this is a screenshot from one of the interview videos that I did with Miss Althea. And that photo right there is I also interviewed one of the, I think, longest working Capitol Police in the State House, Lieutenant Harborshaw. After this interview, we became friends, and I was able to call him Joe. And from Joe, I learned that Steven Spielberg actually filmed in the State House before, so it was really awesome. So also be prepared. During almost every day of my work, I have my camera with me, and this summer a huge debate in the State House, also nationwide, is about reproductive rights, and there are a lot of demonstrations at State House, and if I didn't have my camera with me, I wouldn't have captured all these footages and videos that would be really useful for the interview video that I was making. And the third point is think about what I want from this practicum and what I could contribute with the very limited amount of time. So for last semester, I co-curated a photography exhibit, the Provenance Album, Volume 1, with several lovely folks in this room. I started another video project with citizens and long-term residents in Rhode Island and Providence to talk about their memories of Providence in the 60s and 50s, and that sort of confirmed my passion in talking to people and collecting oral histories and to make them presentable and applicable to different situations. And be brave to ask. So it's connected to the next one, so I'll move to the next one. So talk to people around you. So during the planning of the architecture exhibit that we plan to have in 2020, I had to write a competition brief, which I have no experience in architecture at all, and I don't know what's the differences between a rendering and another 3D rendering and also other renderings. So I sent a couple of emails also to Connor, shout out to Connor, okay, what are some buzzwords that I should know before writing all these, and what are do's and don'ts. And I also Skyped my friend who's doing interior design in London, so she knew all the file regulations for submitting renderings, so that was really helpful. So that saved me a lot of time, so that I don't have to research a bunch of things from scratch on the internet. Last thing is things for workout eventually. So I actually got this practicum very late. It's around late May, I think. So I've been applying to so many places, but I didn't get in. And I applied to the Tennessee State Museum, and I was the second person who's on their wait list. So if the first person didn't reply their email, it's gonna be me. But it's already late May, but that didn't work out. So eventually I stayed in Rhode Island and worked with Lane and Marissa. And it's also a paid practicum, so I saved a lot of money because I don't have to rent another house for the summer. And that's sponsored my museum trip to Paris and to Italy, which I had the opportunity to experience the latest AR exhibition that they're doing in Naples, that they showcase the conservation process of Assyrian carvings. And you basically put on AR glasses and you see all that from those glasses, and that was awesome. So it's another blessing from summer. So that's it.
So these are my 5 lessons. I worked at the Abbey Museum this summer, which is in Bar Harbor, Maine, just outside of Acadia National Park. I don't know if anyone's ever been there. It's kind of gorgeous. These are 3 of the objects I worked with this summer. So the first lesson I learned was building collaborative relationships. The Abbey is supposedly a decolonizing museum. I have some thoughts on that, but they do have part of their mission statement and strategic plan that they steward and provide access to collections that represent historical and contemporary Wabanaki people. So what that meant is I didn't spend all my time in a basement, which is where my office was, but instead I got to go out into the community. So I took one trip into Holton, which is where the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians are. And there were representatives from both Mi'kmaq and Maliseet. So Wabanaki is 4 nations: Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, Mi'kmaq, and Maliseet. And Abenaki are in present-day New Hampshire and Vermont. Oh, sorry. But I was in Maine. I have a lot to fit in, Susan. So I did this Mukatu training. It's pronounced Mukatu, everyone, not Mukurtu, Mukatu. Okay, so I learned that, and I learned the importance of building these collaborative relationships and listening to communities. The next thing I learned, so I got to attend what's called the Native American Festival that the Abbey runs every year. So the Native American Festival is similar to the American Indian Market that they do, but it's just for Wabanaki artists. And there I got to help purchase a new piece of art for the Abbey's collection. So they collect contemporary Wabanaki art, and this was the drum that we purchased from Natalie Dana Lolar. And because I was the collections intern, I got to interview her about every single step of making that drum, from the process of gathering the rawhide and stretching it to dyeing it and creating the back webbing and signing it. So that was really exciting. The next thing I learned were my practical skills. So these are 4 things that I did over the summer. I installed a huge tree vinyl on the floor of a museum. It took a long time. It's very painful to be bending over the whole time. My back hurt for 3 days. But it was really fun, and it was part of an exhibit on the emerald ash borer, which is an invasive species that's killing the ash trees, and Wabanaki people make ash baskets from ash trees, so it's a pretty important topic. So it was exciting to put some interactive element into that exhibit. I got to do case installs around Mount Desert Island, so that's me installing something at the Hulls Cove Visitor Center. So I did a lot of opening up cases, handling objects, which are just day-to-day practical skills that I find really important because I work with material culture in general. So learning how to put it out into the world, I think, is really an important part of the process. I got to make labels. That was fun. That's my X-Acto knife. I did a lot of label making. It's really stressful because you have to take the back off and smooth it onto a piece of foam. If you mess up, you have to reprint it, and it's expensive. So you feel guilty. So I was motivated by guilt not to mess up. And then the last thing I did is that's a custom box that I made. So I made custom boxes to house objects. Another good skill that I'll use this semester at Tamaqua Museum. So I'm doing this, I'm a PhD student, so it was important to me to do a little bit of collections research that helped the Abbey and myself. So I went up to Campobello Island, which is in New Brunswick, and that's the FDR cottage. And there I researched a birch bark artist named Toma Joseph, who's Passamaquoddy, working at the turn of the 20th century. And I went all over the island. Like, I found these like photographs in the public library, and the Abbey didn't really know that this was out there, so it was really helpful for them because right now they're building up that Mukatu site to try to get collections back out into communities. So it was really helpful for them to find out what was up there. It was nice for me to go on a trip. And I made connections back with what was in the Abbey's collections because they have Toma Joseph art and they have contemporary birch bark art as well. My last thing that I learned is work-life balance. Spent a lot of time hiking. It's beautiful, that's my dog. And what was important about this was not just that I got out of the museum, but that I got out into the world and the community and like learned about the land, which I think is really important because like when I was sitting in that Mukatu training, people would refer to places and like people. So being out in the world, I think is important. You can't just sit inside and work in museums all day. You actually have to put yourself out there. Like I went to events and stuff like that too. These were just my pretty pictures. So, all right, cool, thanks.
So at the top of your presentation, you said it was a Decolonizing Museum and you had thoughts.
Yeah, I do have thoughts on that.
Some of those thoughts?
Yeah, so they call themselves a Decolonizing Museum. I think they're a museum that practices decolonizing, that has decolonizing practices. So like the museum was founded as the Robert B. Abbey Museum of Stone Age Antiquities. It was an archaeology museum. And like this summer, another thing I worked on that I don't want to talk too much about because a lot of it's confidential is a repatriation project from that initial museum. And so like they haven't changed the name of the museum. It's still officially the Stone Age Antiquities Museum. So they're practicing they're incorporating these decolonizing practices, but I can't say that they're like a decolonized museum because that would be ceding control of the objects and the museum to Wabanaki people who could be leaders. So that's just my thoughts. They're preliminary, but yeah. Yeah, what's up?
I haven't taken the museum interpretation class with you. I'm
Yes.
just wondering, do you have any insight on what like curatorial files are like in there? Because it's mentioned like being a part of the process of acquiring new objects.
Yeah.
And interviewing the artists, and I was
Yes.
wondering if that type of information goes into the curatorial file.
Yes, it does.
What that's like.
Yeah, so that is what, like, I didn't get into this because I don't have that long, but like almost all of their original collections don't have any information, especially with women artists. They have no attribution to who they are. And so I noticed when I was there that a lot of their newer objects also had really limited information in Past Perfect. So something me and the curator came up together was for me to start interviewing artists, and I didn't just do this one artist, to make sure while people were still around that we got that information from their own words into their files so that they could then be preserved. Yeah. So, but yeah, the collections are rough, the information. So. Other questions? Thank you.
Okay, hi. I'm Ariana, for those of you that don't know me. This summer I was working at Columbia University with the Justice and Education Initiative, which, just very briefly, is an organization that works to provide educational opportunities for people that are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, among other things. So the first thing I learned this summer, we were at Rikers quite a bit, is that Murphy's Law exists at Rikers too. Most of the work that I've done in the past is in prisons, which are not stable environments by any means, but jails are places that are like always in flux all the time. And Rikers especially is an enormous jail complex, and I don't really think I realized how much chaos exists there. And then, you know, you spend like an hour in traffic where aggressive driving is strictly enforced on the bridge, and it's just like nobody has any idea what's going on, and it can be really frustrating to get programming accomplished. And that's just like the name of the game. So being present, usually more important than being prepared. I think that this is kind of like really a big part of the summer was learning to let go of ego in regards to like practicing flexible pedagogy. So like really understanding that you could like go through all those hurdles to get into a space and you'd finally get there, and like nobody's interested in talking about art history or like the thing that you like poured your soul into for a week project-wise. They're just like, I want to paint, I want you to leave me alone, I've had a long day. And so just like learning to meet people where they're at. We're all students in the classroom. I know that we've talked about this for for my fellow second years in Steve's class with the idea that, you know, everyone's an expert, everyone's bringing their own expertise into a space, and like learning that moment where, you know, your expertise and my expertise come together that's like generative good space that makes these workshops work. So, you know, like I wasn't walking into these spaces and I was like, I'm the leader. I was like, I've got stuff to learn from you. You've got stuff to learn from me. And that's like the best part of doing this work. And so then I think like the idea of empowering people in carceral spaces, I think that this specifically kind of boils down to just like choice. Obviously, when you're in a carceral environment 24/7, you don't really have any choice. And so like recognizing that the time when we were there, even for 2 hours, like might be the only time period where the folks we were working with had any choice in like what they were doing, how they were interacting with materials, what they were learning, and just like fostering leadership also in those environments, like making sure that the folks that we were working with really felt like they could come into the space and set things up the way they wanted, and be part of helping like encourage other folks to come and join us. Just like making sure that they had choice in those spaces, I think was important, and something that like I take for granted every day, that like I can choose what I want to interact with and what I don't want to interact with. So just being cognizant of that and honoring that, you know, everybody's human and everybody wants to be able to make choices. Burnout is real. This is a real live image of my brain this summer. For the first half of the internship this year, I was working 6 days a week and going to Rikers 2 of those days. That is a lot of commuting and a lot of time and energy put into these programs, and I think anybody you all know, working with people can be really exhausting, and especially working with people in carceral settings, that is heavy, and heavy doesn't even really like explain the emotion of doing that kind of work, but it's really important to take care of yourself if you want to take care of other people. And I think that's kind of all it boils down to. And then a fun little bonus round. I learned this summer how to handle crisis in the workplace. When a rogue X-Acto blade bit me, that was really fun. And my one tip, I guess, for you would be cut away from yourself. That's like a nice takeaway from this summer. And also, you can get really creative with collage pieces. Like if you get some blood drops on the nice art that you've been working to frame all summer, you can just paste a picture of your thumb over that, and no one will ever be the wiser. So yeah, you know, just be careful, be safe. And yeah, those are my thoughts. Sure. So I was working out of the Humanities Center at Columbia. So the woman that I was working with, my supervisor, mostly just organizes the workshops, although it's not just art workshops. We were also helping to like generate lesson plans and help everything move smoothly for philosophy classes and also creative writing classes that were happening at Rikers. But I helped with, they got some grant funding before I got there, so I was helping them write a final grant report for that funding, and I was kind of just doing a lot of work that just helped to support the programming that they had been doing and would be doing, and I also helped to put together kind of a mini exhibition of the work that we were doing with the young guys for like the 8-ish weeks that I was there with them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi everyone, I'm Mira. I did my internship in DC at the National Gallery of Art. I was working in the library special collections and vertical files, which is where we keep ephemera of less than 50 pages. So this is like postcards, catalogs, invitations for different exhibits, both at the National Gallery of Art and beyond. And I was working with the Evans Tibbs collection to digitize some items in that collection. And there were 78 of these boxes that were organized on a subject level. So that means by date, by location, by institution. And my job was to go in and figure out what of that collection we actually wanted to digitize. So even though I had an understanding of what the collection was, I had to be flexible about what exactly I wanted to do. And we decided to do African American women artists. And this collection was organized by Dr. Thurlow Evans Tibbs, and he was pulling together African American artists' ephemera from the 1960s onward, basically all of the 20th century as well. And so the next thing that we had to do was to figure out what exactly we wanted to pull. And that meant a lot of organization, that meant going through every single box. It meant a lot of fun spreadsheets with fun notes on them to figure out what exactly would look good. And then it also meant, because this is through the library, cataloging every item, giving it its own item number, and then making sure all the metadata was correct as we digitized and worked through it. And we ended up doing local DC artists, notable 20th century artists, and then also artists represented in the gallery's collection. So you can kind of see our workflow a little bit here. The third thing I learned is that work and play do mix. National Gallery is really interesting in that their internship program let us sort of have these workshops where we talked to different people working in the gallery, and one of the things that we got to do was to go on the roof of the West Building. So this is a photo from the roof. Looking north, you can see the Smithsonian Natural History Museum, its dome, you can see the Washington Monument, and then those are the ley lights that are above the galleries. And then here on my right, your right, I don't know, are some Ben-Day dots from Liechtenstein that he would have used in his work. And it's interesting, the National Gallery has a materials studies center where they keep different artist supplies for conservationists to use, curators to use, researchers to use. We also got to look at Mary Cassatt's pastels and Joseph Alber's paint pigments. The fourth thing I learned is to balance future possibilities with current capabilities. So what I ended up doing, can I point? Yes, is right here. And so you can scroll through pages and pages of what was digitized and then click an item and look at it. But eventually we wanted to have this digital collections feature, which is on this side, but this won't be fully put up and organized until the end of this year. So I didn't get to see, I'm not going to get to see that happen in action, but that's the main goal. And so my job was to make sure that all the details were in place so that when this does get fully done in its final iteration, it will look the best that it can look. And the last thing that I learned is to leave something behind. So here are some items that we pulled from the collection to digitize. And then I also worked on creating a workflow so that someone who wants to come in behind me and do scanning and digitizing and wants to understand how we set up that system has the materials, has the information for making that work the best that it can.
Some library science classes, information?
Oh yes, yeah. So yeah, I worked with people who were, masters in library sciences, librarians who were experts in cataloging, and yeah, it was definitely a crash course in how they think. But at the same time, I think it fit in well with things that I've learned in public humanities, and also because the library is within an art museum, I think a lot of librarians sort of think in a museum way, and so that helped us to sort of mesh our thoughts together. Yeah?
Was there anything unusual that you found that you wish more people know about?
Well, I wish more people knew that the National Gallery of Art has a library. Most of the people who go to that library are like high-ranking scholars, like people who are getting their PhDs. They don't get anyone who just is interested in using a library, even though they have like a ton of materials that anyone, it's open to the public, and their walk-ins are so low. So I just wish that they did better outreach. And it's interesting because the National Gallery of Art recently has tried to sort of bring in more of DC local people, local community, and the art library has been definitely behind the curve on that. Okay.
So hello everyone. My name is Elaine. I'm a second year of a public humanities program, and this summer I spent 2 months working as an education and public programs intern at the Chinese Historical Society of America Museum, the CHSA Museum in San Francisco, California. So this is a picture that I pulled from their website. So the museum is housed in the Chinese YWCA building, which was designed by Julia Morgan in the 1930s. And this is the oldest organization in the States dedicated to the interpretation, promotion, and preservation of the culture and history of Chinese Americans. And here are some photos I took at the gallery and the learning center. Yeah. Okay. So the first lesson I learned from this internship is that the best is yet to come. As Sharon has just briefly mentioned, being an international student is really hard, and I didn't settle down my internship until maybe late May or early June. And I was turned down by several institutions, and I also received a few offers that I didn't consider to be the best choice for me. So I decided to wait, and finally I got to the CHSA, which I am really satisfied with, and I really learned a lot from. So if you are not sure whether the offer really appeals to you, maybe you should take a step back and wait. Maybe the better offer will come later. And the second thing I learned is that take on as much as you can. Since CHSA was really a small and community-based organization, so I really experienced a lot of roles and works besides my own original work. And here are some projects and works I have done during the summer. Some of them are more public-facing, such as I have to sometimes sit at the front desk and providing visitor service, and sometimes I need to go on the street and do docent tours and Chinatown tours. And we have our weekly public programs, including some film screening, book lunch, lectures, concerts. Yeah, those kind of public programs really provides me with opportunities to engage with the community. But most of the time, I'm just sitting in the office and doing my own research with our own library resources. And part of my job is to develop a digital archive for the CHSA. So I really enjoy each one of these tasks, and I learned about the operation of a small nonprofit organization from very different perspectives. And I receive a lot of assistance from our staffs, which helps to develop my research. So from then, I learned how to strike a balance between independence work and team play. Sometimes you will know that for some projects you do, maybe working on your own is a better choice. It's more easier and more comfortable for you. But for some other projects, maybe teamwork is better choice. And for the interview projects I did, since the museum has really good relationship with the community, so when I say that I need to do some research and interview with the people, they just kindly offer some contacts and reach out to the people who I have never be able to reach out to, and that really helps to finish my interview project. And yeah, the next thing I learned is that you will have to build your network and keep in touch through your practicum. And a fun thing about this point is that here are two photos I took in our exhibit. And for my research at CHSA, I discovered that Professor Robert Lee from the Department of American Studies, his mother was actually the first Chinese American public health nurse in California in the 1920s and 30s. So I was working with him on his family archive project since the first year, but I didn't know that until I got to CHSA. So these are two family photos of the Fong family and the Lee families. So yeah, it was really a surprise for me. And after I got back to Brown, I continued my work and collaboration with the CHSA and work on the history of the Chinese American Women Project. And yeah, that was a really good collaboration. And the final thing is just enjoying it. just try to explore the city as much as you can, especially if you're going to an unfamiliar city. For me, I've only been to Bay Area once, maybe about 10 years ago as a tourist. So during the 2 months, I really enjoyed the city a lot. I also went to Berkeley, I went to Auckland and Los Angeles, and here you see the pictures from the SF MoMA, the LACMA, and yeah, the right photo is probably from the Berkeley Botanical Garden. So yeah, maybe just try to have fun in the summer, and I hope you can all enjoy your summer practicum. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Liz Malone. I am the Assistant Director for Programs at the Nelson Center for Entrepreneurship. I don't recognize many of you because I'm a part-time student, along with Matt, who are one of you. Any others in the room? Any other part-timers? Oh, hi. Thought I recognized another part-timer. So it definitely makes doing practicums and your full-time job interesting balance. But I have such a great resource working with the Public Humanities Department to really utilize the program and really impact my job. So here are the 5 things I learned. So I did 2 exhibits this summer. One is more fully completed than the other. But before I did that, I went around to different academic departments and co-curricular departments to see what time and resources they devoted to exhibitions. It might seem obvious, but some folks actually dedicate a lot of money and time to it, and some folks it's all volunteer. So I spoke with folks at Watson who definitely have more resources than others, say the Pembroke Institute. And so Pembroke, actually it's all volunteer and they never know when their next exhibition's gonna roll out, but Watson does something I think every month. So I thought that was just interesting to learn. And so I went around and also visited places like IBIS and the Center for Race and Ethnicity, who really make sure that their exhibits tell the story of what they do in their building. I know that sounds obvious, but some folks actually pick sometimes random things that have nothing to do with what their center embodies, which I thought was interesting. And I learned a lot from just these visits because I knew that I wanted our center to really embody the type of work that we do. So one of my other lessons, an exhibit can really transform a new space. And I know that seems a little bit obvious, but our new space is right on Thayer Street, really cool new bold building. It's hopefully not going to be known as the Shake Shack building. A little too late. There are nice new signs with our namesake on. Jonathan Nelson is now like written all over, so hopefully it'll be both. And so this is not your typical, I'd say, space to have an exhibit. So it's kind of like a WeWork, it's a co-working space. I won't go into what I do because that could take up 5 minutes, but not necessarily a typical space for an exhibit. So here's the co-working, everything's movable, super flexible, very contemporary co-working space for students, faculty, staff to work in. And so unexpected, we had so much white space. And when I figured out that we were gonna have so much white space, we opened the building in May, I was like, this would be great for a practicum. An excuse just to utilize everything I've learned in this program and really put it to action in the building. So lots of white space, unintended, none of this was intended to be exhibit space, but as you can see, there's a lot of potential. And so I put a committee together, students and staff, and we came up, I'm only going to talk about one of the exhibits, which is startups that focus on ideas and ventures out of the past 10 years. But we wanted to make sure we didn't showcase your typical entrepreneur, Silicon Valley, straight white guy. We wanted to really go out of that norm and showcase that Brown and RISD are producing entrepreneurs that are working on a diverse array of problems. And so we picked about 12 ventures, and we're still collecting more. And I'm going to show you just a few of them. Okay, so Alisa Jean Charles is a RISD graduate, and she founded a company called Healthy Roots Dolls. And so growing up, when her parents gave her toys, it never really reflected her identity. And so she didn't want young kids to feel that sense of identity crisis. And so she created this doll company, raised a bunch of money, is still working on it. And as you can see, it's this great array in the hallway. And the staircases are our focal point. So that's where you have to pass these pieces of art to get to your next place in the building. This is focused on food waste, so I love these. They have little googly eyes on them, so it's very inviting. It's in our kitchen. And really cool company, raised $100 million, Brown alum, and they literally deliver ugly fruit to your doorstep instead of throwing it away. Probably one of my favorite photos, vibrant photo. This is actually this is called 305 Fitness. They're in New York City, Boston, Miami, and they are just a workout company, exercise company, but they have a really inclusive mission, and I'd love to give you guys a tour one day and tell you more about them. So the stories behind the art pieces led to unexpected impact, meaning really unique alumni engagement. I got to connect with people I haven't connected with in years. It made giving tours of the new building more interactive and just more impactful. As we're still raising money, we get to show the impact of students that have benefited from our programs. Volunteer committee work is difficult but rewarding, and difficult meaning it was all volunteer, so it's hard to get buy-in all the time and people to really produce work. So it did often fall on me, which is something that I kind of assumed just because, we're not paying anyone, which goes to show that I got to connect with students and staff that I work with all the time, and this is renderings of another exhibit we're working on. But we got to utilize the space to brainstorm, and you got to make connections. However, it's really hard when students graduate and stuff like that, turnover, and we have to make a new committee. So this led me to think more critically around sustaining exhibits at the Nelson Center. I think it's super important. I'm biased because I'm a public humanist, but I really want to pitch to my supervisors that we need to invest some money in hiring folks, so maybe a future practicum for someone. And I would love to work with one of you in the future, because I really think these sorts of projects really help tell the story of what we do at the center and make it an inclusive and welcoming place. I went over, sorry, thanks.
Started, they started with one person who was sort of interested, and she just got some of her friends or whoever's wandering through, and they put up art, and then as the people saw how important it was, they put more money behind it, and now that's part of her job, and, and so you must know more about that story than I do, but it seemed like a good model.
Oh, totally. And right now they hired someone. I think they have like at least $20K budget per year. They have an installer that comes in, and he is the point person. But all of a sudden, like, my bosses were like, "Oh, this is really cool. We need now they get to like bragging rights and stuff." So I don't think they gave it. They didn't really care about exhibits. They're entrepreneurs. They don't really care about art. Now they care because we kind of made them care. So.
Right.
Thanks for this practicum for making that happen.
Right. No, I think that's exactly what, I don't remember the woman's name, but that's exactly what they did at Watson. All of a sudden,
I didn't realize
the
that.
art was up. So I think it's sort of interesting to go find, I can find her name, go find her and say,
I would love to.
How did it actually move, and what did you actually need? Maybe you found her, but that.
I didn't, so if you know her.
It seemed like a great model. I mean, the first exhibit's, not so great.
It's rough.
Because, she's doing But I think they've gotten a lot better.
Totally. I'm learning. So I want to keep doing it, but it was really fun. Thank you.
Okay, so hi, everybody. My name is Matt Branch. I'm another part-time student here. I also work full-time in the Student Activities Office. And my practicum was in Bristol in the UK. And I started with this postcard-like view because in addition to the tasks that I did, I feel like a big part of my time there was getting a sort of culturally immersive experience. And I came home with a lot of information which will help inform the project that I'm continuing to do with the organization. So just really quickly, Black Southwest Network is the organization that I worked with. They're working for race equality across Southwest England. This is the director, Sado Jurda. She's a Somali British woman who's really built the organization from a small nonprofit that's was on the verge of bankruptcy to a small nonprofit that has the voice of the mayor, that people are always coming to see all the time. So the first thing that I learned, not knowing anything about Bristol, is that Bristol has a really thriving art scene with many mainstream art organizations, some like pop-up ones, and a really huge street art population of artworks. So Banksy is from Bristol. He's done work at the Bristol Museum. There are other places like the Arnolfini Gallery where there are theaters. I felt like every single day I was doing something different. I was going to theaters, I was going to festivals, I was going to museums. In addition to these sort of traditional spaces, there are also spaces that, this one from the left is called Watershed, and they do cinema, and they also have spaces for artists in residence. And then on the right is Spike Island, where they also have artist studios and spaces in residence. And here's some of the street art that I saw when I was there, some famous Banksy pieces, some pieces that are really topical now. So the one on the right, I actually worked with the husband of the person who did the interviews with me, actually did that artwork. So I have the test print of that at home. I got to bring it home as a souvenir. But it's like a really dynamic place where there's a lot going on. Bristol has a lot of parallels to Providence in terms of connections to the slave trade. I think the biggest is that, Bristol and Providence both being harbor cities, Providence being in the north, it's really easy to sort of assume that Providence wasn't involved in the slave trade, as we all know is not the case. Bristol isn't the same way, especially because in the UK, there weren't as many enslaved people there, but a lot of the money was, people had money invested in plantations in the Caribbean. So it's not quite as visible on the surface as slavery is here in the United States. So this is a building from the University of Bristol, the Willis Memorial Building. The Willis family owned the tobacco factory, which made cigars and other tobacco products, and they made their money on the slave trade. And so this building comes from 1920. After slavery is over, the family provides money for the building. So it's easy to see that the steps are they're a few steps away, right? So it's not like on the surface where the person is currently enslaving people, but the family is still making the money. Similarly, there are a lot of places named for Edward Colston, who was in fact a slaver. He was involved with one of the trading companies that during his lifetime transported around 80,000 enslaved people. So these are things, as you can see, that people are engaging with the statues and pushing back, trying to get some of the names changed. So one of the work that I did there was to interview the directors of some of these cultural heritage organizations and to see what work they're doing around diversity and inclusion and decolonization. Some of the issues are similar to the ones here. My work, in a previous life, I worked at the Brooklyn Museum doing similar work. So I saw a lot of things that are familiar, like artworks like this, colonial artworks, which felt very familiar, similar to our own wallpaper here. Other things that were really interesting, so this woman here, Jennifer Sherrod, she was my partner in the project. She was just hired by BSWN, and we did all these interviews. And it was really interesting to hear from these heads of cultural institutions that we don't know where the black people are. We don't know, we can't hire them. But she had applied to almost every one of these institutions that we were working with, that we interviewed with, and she was not hired. So it was really interesting to see that this is a living example of the way that people don't know what they're talking about. But there is a really thriving scene of children of immigrants, Somali people, people coming from the Caribbean, people coming from Asia and their children, and there's lots of things going on, some of which are institution sponsored and some of which are sort of pop-up. So these are some of the periodicals and things that I got. This one was made by a bunch of students at the University of Bristol, and then some other things where local community members are highlighting their own history. This is another example. One thing that's really different is that Black history in the UK focuses on US Black history. which is something that I didn't know. So this series of murals focuses on Black leaders from Bristol who were involved in the bus boycott, involved in helping to start a carnival, and you can see they're really trying to focus and uplift British, but then specifically Bristolian Black history. So 2 things really quickly, I know I'm over time. One thing that I learned from my time at BSWN is look up and look out and to lift as you climb. So in building up Black Southwest Network, Sadhu and her team were primarily focused with community connections, right? Not necessarily thinking about the government or anything like that. They built up a network of businesses, business owners. They're constantly doing focus groups with local people from the community, and then they invest in local young talent. Black young students, and when I was there with Sadhu, she had a meeting with this student who's on the left or the rightmost picture. He had a project that he wanted to do that was unrelated to our work. She gave him $500 for it. She really feels like she should be investing in the next generation. Similarly, she is now someone, and this is her again, she's someone who is now a sort of a popular figure in Bristol, and when she gets interviewed and things of that nature, she makes sure to shout out organizations and businesses in order to get them recognized. So this is an Ethiopian restaurant that we went to that she was interviewed maybe in January or months before, and people asked where does she eat, and she talked about this restaurant, and now they're flooded with business. The last one is something that I live by myself, but it was underscored, so never come to play, always come to slay. So at this point, Sadhu, she meets with so many different organizations, from the University of Bristol to random researchers who want to do something with the community. She is not afraid to listen to people and then tell them that your idea was completely problematic, we're not moving forward with it, or we're going to need money to invest in that idea. At one point, she was approached by the head of the police department in Bristol, and she scheduled a meeting, and it's just, wait a minute. We're not going to partner. We don't have anything in common. She canceled the meeting, right? So she's in a place where she can sort of call the shots and dictate now. And she really makes sure that she's extremely generous with the members of the community, but then also doesn't allow sort of the infrastructure of Bristol to sort of use the community. And then the last bonus thing, one thing that I learned about sort of as seeing all these artworks and the way that people want to sort of build up sort of honoring the people who helped get them to where they are is to honor the people who helped you to get there. So I just want to thank the members of the staff here, my team in student activities, that was really helpful, Dr. Nicole Truesdell, who helped to sponsor me, and then also everyone at BSWN. This was an incredible opportunity, and I'm continuing to do the research, and it was really a life-changing experience and one of the best experiences of my life. So thanks, sorry, I know it was like way over. Oh, so that's an interesting, so I connected with them. So Dr. Nicole Truesdell is an AVP in the Office of Campus Life. She oversees BCSC, so she's been out front and center in the last few weeks. But I was with her at a conference, and I was talking, this was last year, and I was talking about this practicum opportunity and how I wanted to have an opportunity to do something abroad, because I didn't get to study abroad in undergrad. So she said, hey, I've worked with this organization. She worked with them 10 years ago. She continues to work with them, helping them from sort of an academic point of view. So she just connected me to Sadhu, which also, she invested a lot of trust in me because she doesn't put her site or her organizations out there for people to just sort of come and take, right? So she was really rolling the dice on me because I could have gone on there and like been a hot mess or done some like crazy stuff, right?
But you already, one of the things I think I learned from what you did is that we all have networks, and you need to tell everybody that this is what you want to do in the summer. You did a good job of that.
Yeah, and I was also really inspired by the undergrads here, because you always hear stories of students saying, yeah, I was just like in France for like the semester, like learning the language, and I got funded by Brown. So I'm like, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna like, we're really, I think, well provided for here in public humanities. Why not utilize the resources here to like have a great time someplace and then really be able to utilize your expertise to help do some good somewhere.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks. I'll turn it back over to Ron. Thank you.
So we finished in just under 2 hours, which is really good. I think this is actually the most presentations we've had for this event. So give yourselves a big round of applause. You know, they're great. We have a wine and cheese at 5. Is that right? So
We might be able to push it till 4:30
Yeah.
if you sit around and the cheese comes.
Don't go far.
And don't leave without seeing the exhibit.
Yes. So any closing thoughts that anyone has? Or you've all had enough? Well, thank you again. This was great.